I still remember the exact sound the ER doors made when they closed behind them. That heavy, mechanical thud. My mother didn't look back. My father didn't either. I was lying on a hospital bed in the Atrium Health Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, hooked to an IV, running a fever of 104, barely able to keep my eyes open. And my parents had just decided that my sister's prom was more important than finding out if I was going to be okay. My mother leaned over me before she left. She smelled like the perfume she only wore to special occasions. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Violet only gets one prom night, Mara. You'll be fine. You're always fine." And then she was gone. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I wasn't just lying there suffering. I was waiting, because Ruth Carmichael, the head nurse on duty that night, had already pulled up something on her screen, something my parents had no idea existed, a document worth $155,000, with my name on it. And by the time Gary and Deborah Callahan walked back through those ER doors, smiling and smelling like a party, everything they thought they had built was already gone. This is the story of the night my family showed me exactly who they were, and the night I finally let them. To understand what happened that night in the ER, you have to understand what it meant to grow up as the other Callahan daughter. Not the pretty one, not the social one, not the one my mother introduced first at dinner parties. Violet was 2 years younger than me, and from the moment she could walk, my parents treated her like she was made of something more delicate, more valuable than the rest of us. She got the bigger bedroom, the newer car, the college fund that was still being figured out for me, but was fully funded for her by the time she turned 16. I'm not saying Violet was a bad person. I'm saying my parents made it impossible for her to be anything else. My mother, Deborah, had this way of framing everything so that favoring Violet never sounded like favoritism. It always had a reason. Violet is more sensitive, Mara. You're stronger, Mara. You don't need as much. You should be proud of your sister, Mara. I heard some version of those sentences my entire childhood, and for a long time, I believed them. I told myself that being the strong one was something to be proud of, that needing less was a virtue. It took me until my late 20s to understand that what my mother was actually saying was, "We don't have to try as hard with you." My father, Gary, wasn't cruel the way my mother was. He was just absent in the way that's harder to explain. Physically there. Emotionally, somewhere else entirely. He went along with whatever Deborah decided. Always had. That was his version of peace. I had built my own life by then. A quiet, careful life. I had my own apartment in the east side of Charlotte. I had a job I was good at. And I had spent years, very quietly, very deliberately, making sure that if the Callahan family ever decided to show me who they really were, I would be ready. I just didn't expect it to happen on the worst night of my life. It started 3 days before prom night. I had been ignoring the symptoms for longer than I should have. The fatigue, the low-grade fever that wouldn't break, the pain in my side that I kept telling myself was stress. I was good at ignoring things. I had been trained to be. By Thursday evening, I couldn't stand up straight. I drove myself to the Atrium Health Carolinas Medical Center at 7:43 p.m. I remember the time because I sat in my car for 4 minutes before going in, trying to decide if I was overreacting. I wasn't. The triage nurse took one look at me and moved fast. Severe infection. Possible appendix involvement. They needed to run tests immediately. I called my mother from the hospital bed because, even after everything, she was still my mother. And some part of me, the part that never fully gave up, thought that a hospital call would be the one thing that cut through everything else. She picked up on the third ring. "Mara, we're in the middle of getting Violet ready. The photographer is here. Can this wait?" I told her it couldn't. I told her I was in the emergency room. There was a pause. Then I heard her cover the phone and say something to my father. When she came back, her voice had that particular tone, the one she used when I was inconveniencing her. "We'll come by after the pictures. It's probably nothing serious. You always catastrophize." They arrived 40 minutes later. My father stood near the door the entire time, jacket still on, like he was ready to leave before he even walked in. My mother sat down, asked the nurse one question, and when the nurse said the results would take another 2 hours, she stood up and looked at Gary. That's when she leaned over my bed. "Violet only gets one prom night, Mara. You'll be fine. You're always fine." And they left. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I had stopped expecting softness from Deborah Callahan a long time ago. What surprised me wasn't that they left. It was that they left so easily. No hesitation. No guilt on my father's face. Nothing. I stared at the ceiling of that hospital room for a long time after those doors closed. And then Ruth Carmichael walked in, and everything changed. Because Ruth hadn't just come in to check my IV. She had come in because she recognized my last name. Ruth Carmichael was the kind of woman who didn't waste words. She was in her late 50s, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of calm that only comes from decades of watching people fall apart in hospital rooms. She had seen everything. You could tell just by looking at her. She came in, checked my chart, adjusted my IV, and then she stopped. She looked at the name on my wristband. Then she looked at me. "Callahan," she said. "Are you related to Harold Callahan?" I hadn't heard that name in years. Harold Callahan was my paternal grandfather. He had passed away 14 months earlier, quietly, in a nursing facility on the outskirts of Charlotte. My father had barely mentioned it. There was no funeral I was invited to, no phone call explaining what had happened to his estate. Gary had handled everything, or so I assumed. "He was my grandfather," I told her. Ruth set down my chart. She pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down, which, I would learn later, was something she almost never did. She folded her hands and looked at me with an expression I didn't fully understand yet. "Your grandfather was a patient here," she said, "about 2 years before he passed. I was his primary nurse for 6 weeks. She paused. "He talked about you, Mara. Quite a bit, actually. He said you were the one who visited, the one who called. He said the rest of them," she stopped herself, chose her next words carefully, "didn't make as much time." I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with my infection. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of," Ruth continued. "He told me he had updated his will. He was very specific about it. He said Gary didn't know." She reached into her scrubs pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A printed copy of a legal notice she had held onto, she explained, because Harold had asked her to give it to me directly if she ever crossed paths with me. He hadn't trusted the mail, hadn't trusted Gary. I unfolded it with hands that weren't entirely steady. It was a beneficiary designation, $155,000, left entirely to Mara Callahan. My father had never mentioned it, not once. I lay there in that hospital bed, IV in my arm, fever still burning, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something quieter than that. Clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew I wasn't going to do it that night. They were gone for 4 hours and 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall across from my bed, not out of longing, out of focus. Every minute that passed was a minute I used to think clearly, which, given the fever and the IV fluids and the antiseptic smell of that room, was harder than it sounds. But I had always been good at thinking clearly under pressure. Another thing my mother had accidentally trained me to do. The first call I made was to my attorney. His name is Daniel Foss, and I had hired him 18 months earlier. Not because I had anticipated anything specific, but because I had learned, after a lifetime with the Callahans, that it was better to have someone in your corner before you needed them than to scramble when everything fell apart. Daniel didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I told him I needed to speak with him first thing in the morning about a beneficiary matter. I kept my voice even, calm, the way Ruth had spoken to me. The second call I made was to my bank. Not to move anything. Not yet. Just to confirm, to hear it out loud from someone official, that a beneficiary designation of that nature would transfer outside of probate. That Gary, as executor of Harold's general estate, would have had no legal ability to redirect or withhold it. The woman on the phone confirmed exactly what I needed to hear. After that, I put my phone down. Ruth came in to check on me around midnight. She didn't ask what I had been doing. She just looked at me with that same steady expression and said, "Your results came back. No appendix involvement. Severe kidney infection. You'll need antibiotics for 10 days, but you're going to be fine." She said it the same way my mother had. "You'll be fine." But when Ruth said it, she meant it. I thanked her. And then I said, "He chose the right person to hold on to that letter." She nodded once, stood up, and walked back toward the door. "Get some rest, Mara," she said. "You'll want to be sharp when they come back." And she was right, because 40 minutes later, I heard familiar voices in the hallway, still laughing about the prom. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside that room. My mother walked in first. She was still wearing her going-out blouse, the cream one she saved for occasions she considered worthy. Her lipstick was still intact. She had clearly had a good night. My father followed behind her, loosening his collar, smiling at something she had just said. They looked like two people returning from a party, because that's exactly what they were. They stopped when they saw me sitting up in the bed, not lying down, not helpless. Sitting up, phone in my lap, completely composed. "Oh, good," my mother said, dropping her purse on the chair like she was visiting a friend. "See? We told you it would be fine. What did the doctors say?" I let her finish. I waited until my father had moved closer, until they were both standing at the foot of my bed, comfortable, relieved, already mentally on their way home. Then I said, "I need to tell you both something about Grandpa Harold's estate." The smile didn't leave my mother's face immediately. It faded slowly, the way light does when a cloud moves in front of the sun. "What about it?" Gary said. "He left me $155,000, I said, "directly, as a beneficiary designation, outside of probate. The transfer is already being processed." The room went very quiet. I watched my father's face go through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked very much like panic. That's not possible," he said. "I handled everything. There was nothing left designated." "There was," I said. "He made sure of it, and he made sure you wouldn't know until it was too late to do anything about it." My mother sat down. She didn't say anything. She just sat down, heavily, in the chair she had tossed her purse onto, and for the first time in my life, I watched Deborah Callahan run out of words. My father looked at the floor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I just looked at them both and said very quietly, "He knew who actually showed up." Apparently, he kept track. Neither of them turned pale gradually. It happened all at once. And in that moment, every single "you'll be fine" my mother had ever said to me finally meant something different. It meant she was right. I was discharged the next morning. I walked out of the Atrium Health Carolina's medical center alone, the same way I had walked in, but it didn't feel the same. Nothing did. Harold Callahan had seen me when no one else bothered to look. He had watched and waited and made sure that when the time came, I would be standing on solid ground. I think about that a lot, how the people who truly love you don't always make noise about it. Sometimes they just quietly make sure you'll be okay, long after they're gone. My parents never apologized. I didn't expect them to. But I also never forgot what that clock on the wall taught me during those 4 hours and 17 minutes alone in that hospital room. That the most powerful thing a woman can do is stay calm, stay prepared, and let people reveal exactly who they are. They always do. If this story hit you somewhere deep, you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, because every single week I bring you stories just like this one. And I want to know, has someone in your family ever shown you who they really were at the worst possible moment? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.